Okay, I think we're going to go and get started here. So, thank you everyone for joining the first episode of our webinar series, How Might We? This was inspired by a really fun session we had at CPRS, where we started bringing together just really awesome and interesting folks that we've met on our journey in the technology world, in the startup world, and pairing them with really awesome folks we've met on our journey in recreation. So we'd love to, today we're going to be talking about teams, but over the course of the coming months, we're going to have some really, really cool uh, folks join us and just have conversations centered around parks and recreation. So stepping back for a second, I just wanted to do a quick round of intros for a quick one for me, and then really sharing our two awesome speakers and participants for today. And so you'll hear from me for about a minute, and then I'm going to pass the mic to both Alex and Rebecca for the rest of the session. So I'm Birju. So I think for some of the folks attending, they've met me before, but those that haven't, I'm from Chicago. I always love to put this in here because I grew up as Michael Jordan was on his rise. And so a lot of my early days were inspired by going to the local rec center and emulating what I saw on my TV. Those days stuck with me. I In my professional career, I think things really kind of kicked off when I joined Uber in the incredibly early days, and really got to see what it was like when a company in technology can transform the entirety of something going on, first with Uber in Chicago and helping people get around, and then with Uber Eats and helping people kind of get the food that they want. And then I think the through line to my career is really like I really enjoyed working on technology that made people's lives better and more enjoyable. And so I got a chance to join Alex's team, who is one of our speakers today at The Athletic, and really think about, hey, like how can we, I'll let Alex describe what we were actually doing at The Athletic, but really push the world of sports journalism forward and get more people engaged with the teams they love. Um, but in the spirit of like wanting to really focus on making lives more enjoyable, I got to meet a lot of people in sports, both in my time at The Athletic and then just in my time talking to people in cities that consume sports. And one of the things I learned along the way was there's this entire infrastructure that exists in every city around recreation. And that incredible infrastructure, many of you on the call or all of you on the call are part of it, really has been ignored by all of us that were working in technology and technology startups. And one of the things that got me really excited in my career was to say, okay, how can we bring these two worlds together, these two worlds that luckily rhyme, tech and rec, and these two worlds that feel super disparate, but I think have some themes in common. And so when we think about the point of us coming together here is, hey, like what are the really interesting conversations we can foster between people in technology and startups and in rec? And like when I first pitched this idea to folks, people are like, this is totally different. Like tech people have all of this money. And here we are at rec with like limited budgets. Um, we're like a bunch of like coders and in rec we're dealing with all these like really crazy real life things going on every day, and we're constrained by the public and politics, and uh there's just a whole different world that we're talking about. But I got to meet people like Rebecca in Emeryville and many of the other parks leaders out there, and what I realized was these worlds are incredibly similar. You have these incredibly ambitious goals. How do we serve hundreds of thousands of people in every city with a product or an experience that really delights people day in and day out? Um, Whether you're at Google or you're at Uber or you're at a Parks and Rec department, what you're doing touches every resident. And that type of scale is something that most industries don't see. Um, I think the most exciting thing I saw when I was spending time in Parks and Rec departments was, hey, like every user matters and every resident matters. In tech world, we call them users. I think in Parks and Rec world, we call them residents. But getting that final kid into summer camp is just as important as getting the 100. So, and then the people I've met, and I think this is very true for both of the people you're about to meet, are incredibly passionate people. And I think to take on one of these challenges, you have to be a little bit crazy. And so, that being said, we launched this first webinar series, which was called How Might We, which was inspired by us thinking, hey, like there's this very famous phrase we use in the technology jobs I've had, how might we, to push us to think a little bit more about whatever the topic is. And one of the favorite topics I've gotten to participate in with both like in my time at The Athletic and in tech companies, and also with Parks and Rec leaders, as everyone knows that the core thing that we need to do to build an awesome experience for our residents is to build the passionate and inspired team that can go out and deliver that thing. And so our first webinar topic is how might we build passionate, inspired teams? And this is the point where I stop talking, but we'd love to kind of go ahead and introduce the two folks that we wanted to bring together for this conversation. And I will let that happen now. So I think we're going to push first to Rebecca. Welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Rebecca, I guess like the question for you is tell us about your journey into recreation.
Yeah, so I was born into recreation. My mom was a recreator. I grew up on the pool deck of the Hayward Plunge in Hayward. And it is what was the catalyst to my career in recreation, in getting to work with people, like customer service and helping people get to the programs that they wanted. That led me to graduate with a degree in recreation, which did take some time, which it happens, right, in all of our careers. And finally went back and finished, no matter how long it took, right? Aquatics is where I came from. It's where my blood flows. But I knew that I wanted to do more than just aquatics because of all of the areas in which we get to touch within recreation, from seniors all the way down to infants, and the opportunities that we have. So I've been able to be around with other city municipalities. I've worked with special districts. I worked at a university. I actually did a little stint with Royal Caribbean International, where I worked on a cruise ship for a couple of years, which was talk about honing in your customer service skills there. Which led me here to Emeryville, where I'm the community services director, and I get to oversee so many amazing programs for such a small city. We're about 12,000 people, but we're surrounded by big cities. So we end up operating like a big city. So I'm very lucky to get to do what I do every day, and I'm very happy to be here.
It's very awesome. Thank you for
Thank
coming.
you.
And Alex, hello. I'm just gonna skip the animation here, but yeah, tell us about the through line to your career.
Yeah, sure. So, hey everyone, I'm Alex. Originally from Philadelphia, as you can see from my Eagles helmet. Don't judge me too hard. I'm raising kids now in the Bay Area, so I've got to be a Niners and Warriors and all those other fans as well. But moved out to California about 15 years ago, and joined a company called Strava. If you aren't familiar with Strava, it's a social network / training tool, and much more for endurance athletes, particularly cyclists, runners, hikers, and the like. And actually tons of experience at Strava with many Parks and Rec departments around the world. As Strava has a metro product that was built around using the cycling data from millions and running data of millions of athletes around the world to help inform where a bike path might go, or where people are naturally running, and versus where you might think they're running, and really cool experiences building that out. And then about 8 years ago, left Strava to start my own company, and that company was The Athletic. If you're a sports fan, you may have heard of us. If you haven't, we are a subscription media company built for really avid sports fans around the globe. And our mission was to hire some of the best sports journalists in the world, give them all the tools, the modern tools to do their job as well as they possibly could, and connect them with the sports fans around the world who might want to follow their favorite teams in a way that felt a little more modern and premium than previously experienced, and wound up in early 2022 selling The Athletic to the New York Times. It was a really big acquisition for the New York Times, their biggest in 30 years, allowing them to move into covering sports in a giant way. So it was about 650 people covering sports when we sold the company. And I have since left the company, and in the very early stages of my next thing in healthcare. And I think that touches on a few things that Birju mentioned. One is wanting to build amazing things that touch folks in a way that really matters, and in a way that can change their life really positively. And honestly, like, more important to me is I like to build and work on great teams. I really I wasn't quite ready for retirement, and I really want to work with great people and build great teams. And I'm absolutely obsessed with the trade of, or the craft of, management. So excited to chat today.
Awesome. The last call out I'll make about both these folks before we jump into first questions is, I think Alex is one of the biggest and boldest thinkers I've gotten to work with in my career. And so excited for the perspective he brings to the conversation. And I think Rebecca has been one of the most incredible thought partners as we throw out a bunch of bold ideas and blends this excitement for ideas with passion and practicality in a way that really is a great sounding board for us. And so excited to see where this conversation goes. And so I'm going to drop the slides. This is meant to just be a fun conversation about teams and building them and operating them. I thought we would flow the conversation around how do we hire and build teams? How do we operate and inspire our teams? And how do we keep our teams together? And so before we kind of jump into this, I think the big goal for teams is, at the end of the day, when you build an awesome team, they go above and beyond. And so maybe a fun first conversation for both of you, Rebecca, maybe we start with you on this one, is tell me about a time where you just found yourself going above and beyond, and how did that happen?
In thinking about all of those stories, it always comes back to big events for us. And when we talk about big ideas, one of the ones that comes to mind is we used to do a really small holiday parade. It was a couple of blocks, everyone got involved, and it was a really great small special event. But then we opened a new bridge that bridged over to one of our retail centers, and it became this, hey, what do you think about adding and extending the parade, and then also adding a ribbon cutting in the middle of it, also adding in all of the elements of entertainment that come with it, and then we're going to all walk over to the other side, and then we're going to end in this big, beautiful, gorgeous way with another tree lighting ceremony over in the retail space. And you have a couple of months to make that happen, ready to go. And that's what's fun about us, and what we get to do is we get to say, that's your idea. Okay, how do we figure out, how do we do this? How do we make this happen? How do I get, I don't know, speakers over to a space that doesn't have electricity? And how do I make sure that the mayor has a speaker and a mic that it works for this ribbon cutting ceremony? How do I still make space for our high school cheer team to be able to do their performance in front of their families in a really intentional way that but doesn't take away from the holiday parade and the ribbon cutting ceremony. And so what was great about that is that's an all hands on deck situation that everyone showed up and they made it happen. And even when the little things went out, like the generator ran out of gas because we were so nervous about it not working, we didn't think about refilling the tank. So, you know what? We ran around, we got another generator, and we hooked everybody up again at the last minute. And that took such a huge effort. And when we talk about, I know we're going to talk about building teams. What's important is I was new to this team in my role. So the fact that I was walking into a team that was already existing, and for all of us to be able to come together and work in this way to make this event happen for the community. We're talking about almost 1,000 people walking to do this event, and without really knowing each other that well, and it works. That's a testament to just recreation in general, but to our team here. So
Amazing.
yeah.
Amazing. And Alex, what's your example of just like totally going above and beyond?
Yeah, so definitely on the theme of building teams. I just love doing it. And starting a tech company in the journalism space has its challenges that are probably very similar to tech in Parks and Rec, or Techs and Rec. You're convincing journalists to join a tech company. You're trying to get amazing tech talent to join what they fear is a journalism company, and all the things in between. And it was definitely the craziest for me in The Athletic in 2019. First, my son was born in March. He just turned 5. And about a month later, I started a bi-weekly trip to London to launch our UK coverage covering the Premier League. And just an absolutely incredible experience going from no brand awareness in the UK, and this is where we differ widely from a Parks and Rec department. We had so much money. I had so much money to spend, like a true kid in a candy store. But money wasn't really working. And I actually want to quote something because it was too funny. When you do business in the UK, and anyone from the UK or who's lived in the UK will know this, they don't really take well to outsiders. And they started to write articles about us and our recruiting in the UK. And there was an article in this newspaper called The Spectator. And this is to quote, "I feel that our Yankee friends, with their millions, their fashionable stubble, their groovy jeans, and their brutal tactics should show a tad more respect." And so very quickly we were, against the wall of like, oh, they're not liking us here. We thought we could just charm our way in, and we didn't basically we had to pivot into like really recruiting the best journalists in the country versus hiring them. And so we targeted about 60 people, and we created over 50 decks that were customized per person, targeting these specific people. We rented hotel suites. We brought the folks in one by one, had custom pitches for them. And it had to be well beyond the money because we were getting mocked publicly about the money, and our genes of all things. So very crazy situation, but it turned out that we probably hired about 95% of the people we targeted. And what I really took from that experience, and I take it to this day, is just having first understanding your audience deeply, which we didn't, in terms of a different country. And number 2 is treating the people that you want to bring on your team in a way that makes them feel special. And you're going to get great people when they feel like A, they're going to do the best work of their career, B, they're compensated fairly, and C, they're a big part of it. And they want that, and that was a really fun experience for us.
Sweet. Yeah, I think let's maybe like stay on this topic a bit as we talk about like building and hiring this team. And I think like the theme here is like moving beyond the money. And I think Rebecca, you shared a bit of an example when we were talking before about like the constraints in Emeryville and like how do you actually go beyond the money when you're trying to make these hires?
Yeah. What we were talking about before is, and even heard about it when we were at the conference recently, is how do we cater our job descriptions? Because we know we have these constraints and we have to go in this direction, but how do we implement play and impact? Like that is so important when we're talking about recruiting people in recreation, because you're dealing with youth and you're dealing with seniors and you're dealing with parks. It's what the impact that you're making by taking this job. You're coming here and you are going to change people's lives. And that's the kind of the passion that when we're recruiting and we're wanting to look for team members, that's what we're looking for. And that's what we hope to get, the understanding of what they're going to be able to do in this job here, whether they're part-time or full-time, right?
Yeah, and Alex, like I feel like, you know, when we were out recruiting journalists, we were able to pay them above what they were making. But then if you flip it, at one point you were hiring employees to join your tech startup, and me being one of them, I was in my late 20s making more money at a place like Uber, and you said, "Hey, come join the Athletic and take a pay cut for me." How do you work through those conversations, and what was the inspiration that you were able to find for people?
Yeah, and I think that's an important part of a lot of the startup stories is in 2019, we had a lot of money. In 2016, we had no money. And so there was a journey from 2016 to 2019 where you go from extremely limited resources to like I was building my own desks and taking the trash out and figuring out how to get the bathroom cleaned and all those things versus 2019 where we're in hotel suites and stuff. But I think that the way I structured early on how to recruit and think about it personally was that constraints are really healthy. And without constraints, like things get weird and they don't necessarily get better. And so finding people who thrive in an environment with constraints is just as important to a startup as I'm sure it is important to Rebecca and all of the teams that you might manage. And it's such a different person, right? I mentioned my son turning 5. I'm reading him The Martian, the book, and like there's just people who can operate with constraints, and the story is about a gentleman who gets stuck on Mars and has to like really work his way through being alone on Mars in a little hut. And there are people who can work with constraints, and there's people who really can. And for me, the idea is to first find people who love this idea of being scrappy, who that sounds fun to them. The idea of like building a fort with pillows or whatever it might be, scrapping together anything, the soapbox cars or whatever, that sounds like a good time. Those are the people you want. For me, the second aspect of it is leading by example. I built when someone joined the company, I would build their desk for them and in front of them, on my hands and knees. And I think I have a bad back because of it, because I built probably 40 desks. But you do this stuff. Like you lead by example, and when you can operate with constraints, your team really gets inspired, hopefully to do the same. And if there's one thing as a leader doesn't like, it's complaining. And like when you don't complain and just do your job and figure it out, I think a lot of that uh, will carry through to your employees. But there's this weird aspect of it too, where you're not only on your hands and knees building their desk, you have to simultaneously paint this picture of what your vision is beyond this phase, right? You can't build your own desk forever, right? Like the vision here is a company that is delivering sports news to tens of millions of people. And it sounds silly in the beginning when like 13 people are reading your article, right? Or 13 people are on your website. But you've got to paint this vision consistently that you're going to go so well beyond where you are now, and that this is just part of the journey. And I think back to the phase where we didn't have money and the phase where we have money, and now I'm starting a company again, and like I'm so excited to like get back to the scrappiness. Like it's actually, you don't feel it at the time. You're like, oh, I can't wait to have a marble office or something, or whatever it might be, or like go walk into the New York Times building and whatever. But like, there's nothing more fun than achieving outcomes that even exceed your own expectations with a small team and a scrappy budget or whatever it might be. That's just like what I can't wait to get back to.
Rebecca, I saw you laughing when when the word finding the right scrappy people. Like, yeah, tell me about that. Like, I assume that's just like the mantra in Parks and Rec.
Well, it is in the sense of in again, it's how do you find the right people for you have constraints, you have a budget, you can only go so far with the money. And we're not always recruiting for full-time staff too. That's kind of like when I think of Scrappy, I'm thinking we're hiring 16, 17, 18, 19-year-olds right now. And what we're trying to find is that who's going to fit in our culture right now of, we're growth. We're all in this world of growing from what used to be pre-pandemic to post-pandemic. And so what did it used to look like? Where are we going, and how do we help them along our journey with us? But it's also too is if you're breathing and we need your body, we're going to take you too. So there's that too. We have that opportunity to give people that have never had those jobs before an opportunity to have their first job. Like a lot of our kids, a lot of our teens have never had that before.
Yeah.
And it is so important to find that with our teens as we're starting to look for them. So
Yeah, and okay, so there's a Q&A question coming in that I
oh,
think is perfect for right now, which is someone asked like, what are some good interview questions or techniques that are used to find people who thrive in ambiguity or with constraints? And so, Alex, I guess like um, I'm gonna let you take that question, and I think it would be interesting if you like put on your Parks and Rec superintendent hat and help us think about how you would apply that those same questions to someone you're hiring into Parks and Rec world.
So the only problem is my only real point of reference for Parks and Rec is Leslie Knope. So, but that's all I have. But in terms of the question, I think it's a great question, and it's an important one. And for me, this is obviously just how I handle it. I am very specific in my interviewing technique. It's less about particular questions, it's more the technique. And I use what's called behavioral interviewing. And behavioral interviewing is a style where I even heard a little phrase, I know Beardu does it too, where you say, tell me about a time. And behavioral interviewing is less about walk me through your resume, or how many gallons of paint do you need to paint the White House? It's more tell me about a time when. And so anonymous attendee asks about the thriving with ambiguity and constraints. I will literally say, tell me about a time when you had when the odds were against you, you didn't have nearly enough resources to achieve your goal, but you did anyway. And I'll be generic with it in terms of the Parks and Rec reference. It might be a less experienced person. So, being more vague with the question. I don't care if it's, a sports team or a time that you and your friends threw a party for, your another friend or whatever. It could be anything. When I'm interviewing like senior people in tech, I'll ask them, like I'll take them to a cafe and say, like literally in the cafe, I'll be like, how could you make this place more efficient? Like what's frustrating? I used to do it at this place, Darwin Cafe in San Francisco. Because it's so inefficient. It would drive me crazy. So I would literally just say, how make this place more efficient for me. And so you could use these techniques that are a lot more experience based, like on like a very specific example, or like, on the fly about something related.
I was just going to add to what you were saying is that we do have some, like when we're hiring for a full-time staff, obviously we have to be very specific about our questions. There's outside panels for full-time staff and things like that. But I'm pretty lucky. I actually, one of our supervisors, she loves to ask like the questions, like I was looking it up exactly so I could read it. It's if you could pick any tangible item you would own to describe your personality, what would it be and why? That is such a rec question in order to pull out their personality and make them like pick an item now. Like what is that thing that you're going to pick? And it kind of helps tell what type of personality they are. And it also plays on the fact that we're the play department, we're the fun. And it really pulls out their personalities. And we try to do that with both of our full-time and our part-time staff.
I just want to add on that, and I think that's like exactly how I would think about behavioral questions. Is that like if you jot down the like traits of the person you want to hire, in the case of like how I think about it is your core values of your team. One of my core values that I had at the Athletic and I'm taking with me to my next company is this idea of moving forward fearlessly, and this other idea of no shortcuts. So these are the two core values that I love, and I'm sure Bearju remembers them. And a good example of moving forward fearlessly is what you want to avoid is hiring people who don't move forward fearlessly, who might get a deer in headlights look on them when they're faced with ambiguity, right? And so you start to jot down questions around how to do that, how to screen for that. And now with like Chat GPT, you can just ask Chat GPT, what are some good behavioral questions for this trait? And it's actually really good for that. And no shortcuts, is really hard to screen for because everyone likes to say they don't take shortcuts. But there's nothing worse than someone on your team that takes shortcuts. And so you're really looking at long-term thinkers. And so that might be an approach, but like deeply preparing the behavioral style questions to match your core values. And I always believe this, that I'd rather have someone who went to a state school who matches your values than someone who went to an Ivy League school who doesn't, right? Like 100 out of 100 times, I will take the person who matches values.
And to build on this, not being afraid to add more people to the conversation when you are selecting in the process. We actually did a recruitment where we were looking for a youth a coordinator level full-time youth person, where we actually brought in some kids to ask questions and interview that person, because that was their job. Their job was to take care of these kids and build curriculum around their programs. And I thought the supervisor was amazed. That was the perfect thing in order to find that fit as well, because we can think they're a great fit, but if the people they have, so we had staff, so the people they're going to be supervising at the table, and then also partners. We work closely with the school district, so we had someone on the school district sit on our interview panels whenever possible, and actually had parents involved in a couple of other ones too. So not being afraid to move away from our government kind of like, oh, we're going to have our outside panel and then we're going to have our second interview, which is our hiring interview. It's like, let's get everyone to the table. So this is a team, as much as possible, a team decision together. And that will help create that culture, or have them join your culture so much easier.
Totally. Okay, so you bring this team together, and we're doing a great job hiring. Alex, I guess we'll hone this in on you've hired 95% of the top journalists in England. Little do they know that they're about to work harder than they've ever worked before in their life. And I feel like joining a parks department probably feels pretty similar. And so, how do you, once they're in the door, how do you get them excited every day?
Yeah. Underlying everything is what I mentioned before, which is this vision. And any good leader is constantly repeating themselves, banging the same drum about the vision. Folks need to hear it all the time because they're living it, and it's quite easy to get away for why you're here. I look at retention of employees as somewhere around 5 to 10 times more important than hiring. Because once you have someone great, losing them takes so much longer, right? Just it's incredible how disruptive losing someone great can be. So first and foremost, like just acknowledging it, taking a second as a leader and acknowledging it every quarter, every month, whatever, that retention, like you got to get back to it. Whatever you need to do a couple rounds of like retaining your best people. And the way I think about it mostly is beyond the vision, which is for everyone, is you've got to nurture them. And everyone obviously is unique, and they're gonna have their own way of feeling valued and all that. But to me, like I truly, and this is cheesy, but I truly think of them as like redwoods, and your best employees are redwoods, and like they're demanding, they're big and demanding, and like you should be figuring out. I literally have a file on every employee I've ever managed on what makes them tick, what works for them, what doesn't, what makes them happy, what are they thinking about in terms of a promotion, why would they want a promotion beyond the money, all those things. And I have my own framework for that, which is like I'm always pushing them to do the best work of their career. And so I'm asking them, are you doing the best work of your career? And many of them feel in a rut and they're not. And you talk about it and you say why, and you use your performance cycles, however that might work. And I spend a ton of time before I speak with them on the strategy that is individual to that person. And if I don't know how many people a Parks and Rec manager manages, but I tried to keep it under 8. And that managing 8 files and 8 people is totally doable. It's surprising how far you can go with it when you take a ton of notes and you treat it with the respect it needs. And the last thing I'll say on it is I put so much more effort into my best folks. It's easy as a manager to think of yourself as a firefighter. Oh, all I do is solve problems all day. All I do is listen to people complain and whack-a-mole, whatever the metaphor you can think of, right? It's easy to fall into that trap. That's the trap of what I think is a mediocre manager. And I've actively trained managers to look, that's like the work you need to do. That's fine. But your real job is to nurture your best people because you're going to get so much more out of your best people, and they're going to inspire the next group of great people, and they're going to set the example for the next people. And so the real work for me, for a manager, is nurturing your best people.
Totally.
Go ahead.
There's a question coming into the QA that I thought I could maybe like split into two. And so I think this is coming from Davey. The question he has is, I think a very good example of Parks and Rec, which is how would you handle a team that will end up having a mixture of long tenured staff that likes to do things the way they've already done them, and then new staff that wants to do things in a new way and question things. And Rebecca, I guess maybe if you could help set the stage for this, like describe what um like this environment is like in Parks and Recreation.
Yeah. So that is Parks and Recreation. You know, we're lifelong learners, and we're lifelong team members in the sense that you know, we're going to have our people that have been here for 20 years, and we are going to have our people that we just brought on and they've only been here for a year. And so with that, it's about bringing them to the table and being transparent about the goals and what we're trying to get to. And we're always looking to work towards that, but bringing them to the table to be a part of the decision making. A lot of times we get stuck in, I'm the department head, I'm going to make all the decisions, I'm going to make all the changes, and that doesn't get communicated down properly. Whereas I'm the opposite. I'm like, I'm not, there's some things I have to make those decisions, but I'm going to try and do as best I can to have that conversation with each person, if it has to be individual, or it's going to be as a team, like, let's talk about this. And what do you guys think? How do we roll this out? How do we make this happen together? If you bring them to the table, they're going to, there's movement happens naturally because they're hearing from others around them. They're able to share what they think is the right way to go, or however they want to see things happen. And opening that up is huge, both in retention, in allowing them to have a part of that policy making, decision making process. It alleviates a lot of that, but also respecting the history, finding the balance, right? Respecting the history, but respecting what the vision of the future is, because I'm in the middle, right? You know, the history is you know, you talk about redwoods, Alex. My camp name is Redwood, by the way. And I see that, you know, that foundation that most people think they're immovable and they don't want to make change. I try and build that as that's the foundation that we have to build on. You're rooted in the ground because your roots are strong and they're long. That means we're strong, and we're going to build on top of that. Instead of trying to force the movement and forcing them into a direction, it's easier to build on top of and use that history as a way to make change.
Yeah.
I can follow on with a quick example. I agree completely. I at the Athletic, we were hiring journalists that had been doing their job the same way for often 40 years. And I remember, I'll give you a very specific example. A gentleman that we hired in Pittsburgh, he came on, and we asked him to do his job in a different way, and he was really struggling, to the point where he called someone on the team and was crying. And he said, "I'm just not built for this. I should go back to a newspaper." And this is a guy in his early 60s, I think, maybe late 50s, I'm not sure. We were pushing him to think about the way we do journalism at the Athletic. It was different. And the way we handled this specific situation is, first, we have to understand the incentives, right? If you are asking people to do their job in a new way, it is because it's better or faster or cheaper, and you have to prove that to them. And so what we set out to do with this gentleman was, hey, we're going to do a little experiment with you. You got to trust us just this one time. You're going to do this one story. And we're going to fly you over to Russia. We brainstormed with him on what it would be. And we flew him to Russia to tell a story on Yevgeny Malkin, the hockey player from the Pittsburgh Penguins. And so this guy had never left the US for his job. And he's like, "But I have to do this story tomorrow." We're like, "Don't do that story tomorrow. Don't go to the press conference. Go to Russia. We asked you to go to Russia. Just trust us." And so he did this. We worked with him. We edited the story for a ton of time. It took about a month to do this story. And he's used to writing every day. And that story drove enough subscribers to pay for his salary 3 times over forever. And that's an example. That's a very clear example. And like to this day, like, you know, he'll invite me to any party, and if he gets married again or something, I'll be invited. Like, and I didn't do anything. It was the people on the team. But it's like at the moment he needed us most, we were there for him, and we said, trust us. This is why you're going to do it this way. And it's not going to always work that way. Of course it doesn't. But your goal should be to show them the results of you doing it a new way are going to be greater, or it's going to be cheaper, or you're going to stress out less, or whatever the reason you're doing it a new way. If you're doing it a new way just because, that's not valid with smart people. You've got to have good reasons. And so that to me was an example in terms of someone asked, how do you nurture your staff? You're there when they need you. You don't ever let anyone drown. You know, while I said you nurture your best people for retention, you don't ever let anyone drown. To me, that's the nurturing that a team needs.
You take care of people in your charge. You take care of them, and they will give it back to you. But it has to be sincere, and it has to be empathetic, and not just because we have this goal. It's because I really care about you.
Yeah, and I wanted to, I guess we'll go with one more like little topic or subtopic area here, which is I'll use the anecdote of I guess me getting to work with and for Alex. I think the thing that retained me was being given an exciting space to be both doing my job, but then also to like find space to be creative. And I think one of the things that I've heard as I speak to Parks and Recreation leaders is it's really hard to find ways to get people time to innovate or time to think about change. And so I guess maybe first to Alex, like how do you create, like, you know, when we have deadlines and tight goals, how do you build in time to like drive innovation out of your teams?
Yeah, so I'm on year 12 managing designers. And if anyone's ever managed a designer,
Alex, you gotta explain what a designer is too in this context.
yeah, a designer is like someone who, like, you know, the website that you visit or the app that you use, they like made it look the way it looks. I know I'm wearing black right now, but they always all wear only black. They're very moody. They're very complicated. They always need more space to be creative. And you're just like, hey, I have a deadline. I know you don't care, but I do, because I've got a business to run, whatever, right? Designers are incredibly difficult to manage. I think everybody has this problem. This is one of the like hardest problems of managing people in a mature environment. In startups, it's very easy because everything is new and everything's creative. It's all from scratch. But when you're in a steady state, I call it cruise altitude. When you're at cruise altitude, you could be on a plane and you don't really feel like anything's happening, right? Like unless there's turbulence, which is fun or scary, depending on what kind of person you are. But like if you're at cruise altitude, you know, you've got to be creative. And this is the way I think about it, is you've got to be creative for them, which is you've got to find the ways to give them the latitude to you know, develop. I use the word develop intentionally because there's nothing worse than being in a job or being in a class or doing whatever where you don't feel like you're learning or you don't feel like you're getting better. And many times, you know, you're asking folks to do rote work. And so like there's not like one clear answer, but the answer is being creative as a leader. And I think it all comes back to your job as a manager, is deeply understanding your people, deeply understanding what makes them tick. Someone asked about nurturing your staff. The way you nurture them, the way you retain them is deeply understanding them. And if someone, you know, two people doing the same job might have two very different versions of what challenges them. Someone might want to be a manager, or someone might want more responsibility. Someone might want to start a project from scratch, right? Whatever it might be, you got to figure that out before coming up with the creativity or creative idea. You've got to understand what is success here, what is going to make them feel developed, what is going to make them feel pushed. And for everyone, that's a different avenue. And so
And round out that designer story. Like how did you solve that?
so yeah, so there's like a good example is like a designer who loves to make logos. There's like some designers who love like branding and thinking like outside the box of like that. You might actually like have them work on like a sub brand of the company. Like, hey, I need you to focus like 10% of your time, 20% of your time on this new project where we might, you always say we might. I think it's how we might, right? We might launch a higher tier subscription. What would that look like? Play around with it. Come back to me. And like that's an example. I've done that multiple times with folks who might be like in a rut because they haven't designed something new and pretty in a while, giving them a little latitude, but not a ton of time. You can't, this is all just the push pull of management. Is I expect you to deliver. Like bar none, I am evaluating you on output. And if you can deliver this output, let's talk about the time that you have outside of that to, express whatever needs you might have in this role. So it varies widely.
I was gonna say with recreation, I feel like it's so different in that, our days might be planned in one way. Like I think this is what's gonna happen today, but it always ends up getting derailed and I have to go in a different direction. And I feel like our teams have to do that all the time. And so for me, it's yeah, we have deadlines for certain things, like we got to get the guide out and all of those things, summer registration. But I think what's important is room to grow and not being afraid to let them leave is a really important piece, because we do have growth restraints within Parks and Recreation. Like there's only so far positions you can go. So if you are somebody that's looking to move in a different direction, how can I help you be the best version of yourself and then learn to get you to that next level? Flexibility and empathy is so important, especially again coming back to coming out of the pandemic, where it's so different in how people are, where they're working, and how much time and energy and work-life balance, and how we are doing that and offering those opportunities for people to do that. And for me, it's room to make mistakes. Like go for it, and it's okay if it didn't work out the way you actually wanted to make that happen. It's okay. We're going to sit down, we're going to learn from it, and how are we going to try again the next time? How do we get to yes? How do we get to yes is always the fun part of our job. And then again, it's creating an environment where I want my team to disagree. I want my team to come and challenge. It's not because I said so. You've got the idea and you think it should be going in this direction. You're very passionate about it, and be able to have the space to come in as a manager for them to yell and cry and be angry and do whatever they need to do. And they will always have that space. And I think if you give them that, they're going to continue to work together with you. And that's just having it, because we're such in this human aspect of our jobs. Like we're dealing with some serious things on a daily basis about finding moments for people to have a safe place to go and play, and a safe program that might be their only moment for that day. And that's a heavy topic and a heavy subject to do on a daily basis, that we have to allow for our teams to have that safe space as well.
Awesome. I'm just looking at time. We have a few minutes left. I think this is it was just super interesting to hear the theme around um giving the team space to be creative, or the individual space be creative, and then come up with crazy ideas, and then maybe they fail, and that's okay. And kind of on that theme of just being a bit crazy, I thought we would end with just a fun question. This question is just kind of pointed to both of you, in the theme of us really pushing the conversation forward around recreation. Um, Either one can start. Um, Alex, I know you're not an expert in the space yet, but I guess just based on the conversation, when we think about 2040, 2050, 2060, what's really exciting both of you about what could change in the world of sports and recreation and local activity?
For me, I'll say accessibility. It is information and how we receive it and how people get it, and how people sign up for things, and that part of accessibility and recreation, like understanding and knowing what we have to offer in a way that everyone can get to and learn about. So to me, it's always about how we get the word out and what's the new way that we're going to be able to do that.
Cool.
I'll go a different route here. I don't know much about Parks and Rec, but I think what's really inspired me, and it's more the last decade or so, is some really great examples of things like the High Line in New York, tunnel tops in San Francisco. I think like the scale is getting grander, and the impact is getting much greater. And I think forward, like, the pandemic has definitely, put an emphasis on just how important this group of folks is to a city. And I think the success of some of these grander projects, I hope, leads to more and more bold plans, because I think it is like, when I live in Presidio Heights, and there are 4 parks within walking distance with my kids, and it is why we decided to live here. I don't have to get in a car. And I think that, like, because of these grand experiments, I think you'll start to see a lot more private money coming in to support it, because of just how successful it is. I ran into half the people I live next door to in tunnel tops this weekend, and just an incredible place for people to be on a beautiful San Francisco day, and I really hope that inspires more. I think it will.
Amazing. Okay, well, I think we're
Absolutely.
at time here. Um, Rebecca, Alex, thank you both so much for your time, everyone attending. Excited to have you part of this conversation, excited to hopefully have everyone join more. We'll see y'all soon.
Thank you.